On Christmas, Grandma always said, "I don't need a gift just to see you happy." But years later, her grandson found a box inside a broken oven with 14 folded papers, and on each one, a phrase written in silence. The last one said something that made him collapse. Before we begin, take a moment to subscribe, like, and comment below. Where in the world are you watching from? What city or country do you call home? Your support means everything and helps us keep bringing powerful stories like this to life. Thank you for being here. Now, let's begin the story. His fingers trembled as he touched the cold oven handle. The house smelled of dust and memories. She always smiled at Christmas, said she needed nothing. But now, with her gone, a hidden box inside that broken oven was about to reveal the words that shattered his heart. The scent of ginger and cinnamon wafted through the old house on Christmas Eve of 2009. 12-year-old Eli zigzagged around the tree in the living room, his laughter mingling with the delicate hum of carols on the radio. Multicolored string lights blinked against the window, reflecting on the dusty wooden floor. In the corner of the dining room, perched on a creaking wooden chair, sat Grandma Teresa. "Grandma, come see what I got," Eli shouted, displaying a new handheld gaming device. He bounced on his toes in excitement. A cluster of relatives, mostly older cousins and a few aunts and uncles, bustled with conversation, paying little attention to Grandma Teresa, whose eyes shone with an unspoken tenderness. She gave Eli a soft smile. "I've already got everything I need," she said. Her voice had the faintest quiver, overshadowed by the noise of the boisterous gathering. He grinned back, young and carefree, and darted off to show his gift to someone else. By the end of the evening, after mountains of wrapping paper had been stuffed into trash bags and the plates were cleared, Grandma Teresa quietly disappeared into the kitchen. Eli, chasing a soccer ball with a cousin, barely noticed her absence. That night, as the clock struck midnight and the few remaining guests toasted the holiday, she finally re-emerged, carrying a tray of leftover cookies she had baked. He remembered her eyes more than anything else, kind but somehow distant, as if containing a secret no one had bothered to ask about. Years later, that memory returned to him in a single dizzying moment, the day he learned of her passing. Now, at 27, living alone in a cramped Boston apartment, Eli found himself staring at the phone in his hand. His mother's voice had been blunt. "Grandma Teresa passed away this morning," he whispered. "Was she in pain?" A pause. "We aren't sure. She never said much. You know how she was." In truth, he didn't know how she was. He hadn't spoken to her in 4 years, caught up in his new life, college, a job at a marketing firm, and a circle of friends who didn't understand small-town family dynamics. Grandma Teresa had sent him letters at first, short notes telling him she was proud, that she hoped he was happy. He hadn't replied after the first year, using work and social obligations as excuses to postpone a trip back home. Now, the phone line was silent. He could almost feel his mother's judgment. "Will you come for the funeral?" Eli steadied his breath, leaning against the cold kitchen counter. "Of course. I should have visited her sooner." "Don't blame yourself," his mother said quietly. "She never wanted to be a burden." He hung up and closed his eyes, bombarded by flashes of Grandma Teresa's gentle face at that last Christmas. She had given him a small knitted scarf, which he'd left behind on a chair when it became too warm. Had she noticed? A few days later, he drove through snowy highways to the small town of New Haven, Connecticut. The weather was unforgiving. Thick flakes coated his windshield, forcing him to drive slowly. He scrolled through the radio channels absently, hearing static more often than music. As he arrived in the neighborhood of weathered Victorian houses, he was struck by how little had changed since his childhood. The streets were lined with old street lamps casting pale yellow halos on the icy sidewalks. He parked next to a rusted fence. The house, her house, waited in the gloom of late afternoon. It looked smaller than he remembered, with chipped paint peeling from the siding and the front steps sagging. On the porch was a faded rocking chair, motionless in the winter wind. He entered using a key his mother had given him, turning the lock with a tremor of apprehension. Stepping into the dim interior, he saw the same ancient wallpaper, the same worn rugs, the same sense of quiet that felt oddly palpable. Somehow, it smelled like pine and old books. His footsteps echoed on the wooden floor. The funeral had been arranged for the following morning, so tonight he would stay in her house. Dropping his duffel bag in the hallway, he glanced at the living room. On the mantel stood family portraits, including one of him as a smiling boy of 10, hugging Grandma Teresa. His stomach twisted. Guilt rolled over him like a relentless tide, but he didn't know how to name it properly. The last time they had actually spoken was over the phone. She had asked if he could visit for Easter. He'd said maybe. Then the call ended. And now here he was, too late to say anything that might have mattered. He turned toward the dining room. The same table where they had once shared Christmas dinner stood in the center, draped with a plain white cloth. He thought of that final holiday memory, her quiet presence, overshadowed by everyone else's noise. The memory felt more vivid than ever. In that moment, Eli realized he knew shockingly little about who his grandmother truly was. The woman who had always said, "I already have everything I need." What had she really needed? That question stayed with him like a persistent chord, heavy and unanswered, haunting the silent corners of the house. He forced himself to take a deep breath. "I'll start sorting things," he murmured, as if speaking to the walls would ease the tension in his chest. Maybe it would keep him from drowning in regret. He braced himself for the next day's funeral, for the closure he wasn't sure he deserved, and for the house's secrets he had yet to discover. Early the next morning, Eli stood by the casket at the small funeral home. A short, quiet service took place in a modest chapel with pale green walls. A local pastor offered basic condolences, calling Teresa a kind soul. A handful of older neighbors came, offering stories of how she used to help them. Eli's mother gave him a restrained hug. He didn't cry. He couldn't. His emotions were lodged somewhere in his throat, refusing to manifest. After the service, the small group accompanied the casket to the cemetery, where it disappeared into the cold earth. When it was done, everyone left with hushed voices, leaving Eli alone. The walk back to Teresa's house felt surreal. A fresh layer of snow covered the sidewalk, crunching underfoot. He had a key, but something made him hesitate before unlocking the door. A memory flashed. Years ago, he was excited to arrive here for summer breaks. Now, the same door loomed like the entrance to a realm of the past, filled with regrets. Inside, the hallway was dimly lit by a single window, its curtains drawn. Warm air from the heater battled the draft that seeped through old windows. As he set his coat on a rack, he decided he'd had enough of the eerie stillness. He walked through rooms, turning on lights. The living room glowed in a muted yellow, revealing crocheted throws and hand-stitched cushions on the couch. There were more framed photos of him, from childhood to adolescence. She'd displayed them all so proudly, even while he'd lived his own life far away. By noon, he realized he was hungry but found nothing in the fridge besides outdated condiments. Slipping on a jacket, he ventured into the neighborhood to buy groceries. The main street had a grocery store, a tiny bakery, and an old diner. He stepped into the store, scanning the aisles. An elderly woman stocking shelves noticed him. "Eli, is that you?" she asked, peering through thick glasses. He managed a polite smile. "Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Rafferty, right? It's been a while." Her face softened. "Oh, I heard about your grandmother. She was such a generous lady. always paying off folks' grocery tabs, even if she barely had enough herself. Paying off tabs? Eli repeated, startled. She nodded. Said she'd do it in your name, too. Something about how her grandson inspired her to be kind. You didn't know? His pulse thudded in his ears. No, I didn't. I had no idea. Another tide of guilt washed over him. Thanks for letting me know. Loaded with questions, he hurried back to the house, groceries in hand. Why would Grandma Teresa pay off strangers' grocery bills and say it was from him? The puzzle only deepened his sense that he had neglected to see who she truly was. Once home, he set about rummaging through the kitchen cupboards. Cereal boxes, chipped mugs, old utensils. His gaze fell on the battered gas oven, a worn-out tea kettle perched on one of the burners. There was something about that oven. He remembered it from childhood, but it looked older, with peeling edges, like it had been patched up many times. He opened it, half expecting to find some hidden letter or lost photograph. But it was just empty metal, blackened from countless meals. Dismissing it, he carried on searching the cabinets for any clue about her finances or medical records. Nothing. He found a few utility bills, modest social security statements. It seemed she hadn't had much money to spare, yet she was paying grocery tabs? Late afternoon light filtered in through the living room curtains as he sat in an armchair, scanning old letters addressed to her. Most were from insurance companies or local charities. He found one addressed to him, a card he had never opened. The postmark was 2 years old. Inside, a simple note in Grandma Teresa's spidery handwriting read, "Eli, I'm so proud of you. I hope you always stay warm. Don't worry about me. Love, Grandma T." Despite himself, he felt tears prick the corners of his eyes. She had worried about him being cold, yet he was the one who let her freeze in loneliness. The sun began to set. Restless, he walked to the corner store to buy dinner. On the way, a neighbor recognized him. She was a middle-aged woman named Sandra, who approached him gently. "I'm sorry for your loss. Teresa was like an angel around here. Never forgot a birthday. Baked pies for the church." "Did she tell you about the time she sewed a whole set of blankets for the children's ward at the hospital? She said you helped pay for the fabric." His face went blank. No, she never told me." Sandra squeezed his hand, sympathy in her eyes. "Maybe you gave her something more important than money. Hope, maybe." Then she left him on the sidewalk, carrying her groceries in a bright pink tote bag. That night, after a quiet microwave dinner, he wandered back to the living room, where a photograph of young Eli hugging a cheerful Grandma Teresa stared back at him. He flicked off the lamp and let the house slip into darkness, a thick hush filling every corner. As he tried to sleep, his mind echoed with new questions and a persistent sense that this house was still holding on to secrets. If only he could look in the right place. The next morning arrived bright but chilly, the sun reflecting off fresh snow piled on window ledges. Eli's night had been restless. He rose early, determined to search for more information about his grandmother's hidden generosity and her final years. Sifting through drawers in the dining room, he found crocheted doilies, faded receipts, and letters from local charities thanking her. Still, the puzzle of where she had gotten the money and why she claimed it was from him remained unsolved. Finally, a sudden thought made him pause in the kitchen, eyes locked on the worn-out gas oven. The day before, he'd felt something about it was off. He knelt beside the stove, his palm resting on its tarnished metal surface. A small panel at the back seemed slightly loose, as if it had been tampered with. Grabbing a flashlight, he unscrewed the panel. It creaked open, revealing a narrow cavity. Inside lay a plastic-wrapped package, taped carefully. His heartbeat surged. Setting the flashlight aside, he pried the package free. Beneath several layers of protective plastic, he discovered a small, nondescript cardboard box secured with a piece of worn ribbon. He tugged the ribbon loose. Within were 14 folded sheets of paper, each with a date that corresponded to a past Christmas day. His breath caught as he unfolded the first note. December 25th, 2010. Today I asked the kettle how the morning was. It whistled back at me. I wish you had been here to laugh. Hands trembling, he opened the second. December 25th, 2011. I dreamed of your hug last night. It felt so real that I woke up smiling. Emotions he'd buried surged to the surface. These were her private letters, never sent. She must have written them each Christmas after he left for good. Each note was short, a snapshot of her loneliness. He read the next few in stunned silence. 2012. The house is too quiet. I tried to call you, but maybe your number changed. I hope you're okay. 2013. My legs hurt, but I still made pie. You loved my apple pie once. I left a slice for you on the table just in case. Tears blurred his vision. Why had she hidden these letters inside the oven of all places? Did she expect he'd find them someday, or had she simply needed a private space to express her sorrow? Determined to read them all, he carefully lifted the entire stack into his lap, leaning his back against a wooden cabinet. With each page, the depth of her yearning became clearer. She referenced groceries, small acts of kindness, and always mentioned how proud she was of him. One note from 2015 read, "You're doing so well. I see your photograph in the alumni newsletter, always smiling in group photos. I tell the neighbors my grandson is making a difference in the world." But the 2016 note hinted at a darker turn. 2016. My doctor says I need dialysis soon. I told him I'd think about it. Maybe next Christmas I'll be stronger. His heart clenched. She had known about a serious condition. Dialysis wasn't a minor matter. Another letter, 2017. If I pay for the groceries in your name, maybe it'll feel like you're here, giving to the people you once knew. And the second to last, 2018. My strength is failing. The bills are hard to handle, but I manage. I always manage because I know you would want me to. I wish I could see you more than in photos on the neighbor's phone. Finally, he reached the last sheet, dated just 1 year ago, 2019. If you're reading this, it means you've finally found my gift to you. You never owed me anything, Eli, but I hope someday you'll understand why I did what I did. His tears flowed freely. She had foreseen the day he would discover these notes, calling them a gift. He felt raw, as though part of him had been ripped open. He realized now that her repeated insistence that she didn't need anything was less about contentment and more about protecting him from guilt. He set the stack aside carefully, eyes burning, heart pounding with a swirl of regret and wonder. Gathering the notes back into their box, he whispered, "Grandma, I'm so sorry." Then he heard a soft tapping on the back door. He sprang up, nearly dropping the box. Outside, he found a mail carrier. An older man with a friendly face, he handed Eli a small envelope. "Just found this letter in the box. Looks like it's been stuck there for weeks." Thanking the mail carrier, Eli glanced at the envelope. It was addressed to him, the return label reading, "Father Jonas, St. Lucy's Church." Confusion rose. He quickly slipped inside and opened it. The letter was short. "Eli, if you're reading this, please come see me at the church. Your grandmother left something for you, but she gave me strict instructions to pass it on, only if you came back. Father Jonas." Another wave of disbelief, yet another secret. He looked around the quiet kitchen. The sun filtered through the window, illuminating dust motes in the air. The old oven door remained open, revealing the empty space where the box had been. She had so many hidden corners in this house, and apparently in her life. He wondered how many more revelations were waiting for him. Pocketing the letter, he glanced at the clock. Mid-morning. He would head to St. Lucy's Church immediately, because if there was one thing he'd learned from those letters, it was that he owed her more than he could ever repay. with her final lines echoing in his mind. "You never owed me anything, Eli." He stepped outside, bracing against the crisp winter air, determined to follow her breadcrumb trail of secrets, no matter where it led. Clutching the envelope from Father Jonas, Eli hurried along the snow-crusted sidewalks. St. Lucy's Church stood a few blocks from the center of town, its aging steeple rising against a pale gray sky. As he approached, he noticed a row of stained glass windows depicting biblical scenes. The morning light cast dancing colors across the snow. Inside, warmth and the scent of polished wood greeted him. Few people were around at this hour, just a lone woman praying in a pew. Eli spotted a slim figure in clerical attire near the altar, Father Jonas, presumably. The middle-aged priest turned, beckoning Eli forward with a gentle smile. "You must be Eli," he said softly, extending his hand. "I'm sorry for your loss. Your grandmother was a dear friend to many in this parish." Eli offered a shaky handshake. "Thank you. I got your letter. You said she left something for me?" Father Jonas nodded, gesturing for him to sit on a pew near the front. "She did. But first, tell me, how much have you uncovered so far?" Awkwardly, Eli recounted the hidden notes in the oven, how each described her loneliness, her small acts of kindness, and hints of an illness she hadn't addressed. The priest listened intently, never interrupting. When Eli finished, Father Jonas reached beneath the pew and pulled out a small, leather-bound folder. "She told me, 'Give this to Eli only if he returns of his own accord.'" He handed over the folder, adding, "Open it. It might answer some questions." Eli's fingers trembled as he undid the clasp. Inside were several documents. The first was a receipt for partial payments to a local hospital. Another was a donation record in his name. The final sheet, though, was a discharge form that read, "Declined dialysis, patient's decision, reason, financial constraints, personal choice." And at the bottom, his grandmother's signature. Shame clawed at his insides. She had effectively sacrificed her health. For what? So she could pay donations in his name? So she could keep him from worrying or feeling obligated? It was more than generosity. It was self-denial. Father Jonas spoke quietly. "I tried to convince her otherwise. We set up a small fund for her treatments, but she refused, told me, 'I just want to make sure Eli has a chance at life I never had.' She spoke of you with pride, always." Tears stung the back of Eli's eyes. "I was too busy living that life to realize what was happening to her." The priest rested a sympathetic hand on Eli's shoulder. "She never blamed you. She always said she didn't want to hold you back." Leaving the church, half an hour later, he felt stunned. Outside, the world seemed too bright, the snow too pure compared to the turmoil in his mind. At the gate, an older man with a cane stopped him. "Eli, I was a friend of Teresa's. She gave me your photograph once. Told me you'd do great things. I hope you will." This recurring theme, that she was proud of him, that she told everyone about his supposed generosity, gnawed at him. He hadn't been there to see it. She had created an image of him as a kind benefactor, possibly to fill the void of his absence. He decided to return to the house and read the rest of her notes carefully, searching for clues. Pausing only to grab a quick lunch at the diner, a small place that smelled of grilled cheese and tomato soup, he recalled the last time he ate in that diner was a decade ago with Grandma Teresa. She'd been quiet, saving every penny. After slurping down the soup, he hurried back. The living room was still, the only noise his own footsteps. He took a seat at the dining room table, where holiday meals once took place. Gently, he spread out the 14 notes, reading them again, but slower, looking for any reference to her declining health. She mentioned joint pains, dizzy spells, but always ended with a hopeful line about, "Maybe next year, Eli will come." In the background, a mirror hung on the wall, the glass cracked in the corner. He recalled in his childhood it had been intact. Perhaps she broke it while cleaning or had an accident. The symbolic reflection of what they'd lost tugged at his heart. Midway through rereading the final letter, he noticed a small scribble on the margin he hadn't caught before, referencing a second set of promises she had made. Another puzzle? Was it the grocery store tabs, the hospital donations, or something bigger? He wondered if his mother knew more, though their relationship was strained. She had rarely visited her mother in the last few years as well. Maybe she could fill in some gaps. He texted her, "Mom, are you free to talk? Found some notes." "Need answers." Her reply came swiftly, "Sure, come by the house." Eli inhaled. He hadn't planned on seeing his mother so soon, but he had no choice. He had to piece together the full extent of his grandmother's hidden life. Gathering the notes, he secured them back in their box, ensuring none would be lost. As he stood to leave, he glanced again at the cracked mirror, half expecting to see Grandma Teresa's reflection. Instead, he saw only himself, a younger man with guilt shadowing his features. "Grandma," he murmured, "I swear I'll figure this out." Stepping onto the porch, he locked the door behind him. The day was turning cloudy, a sure sign of more snow on the way. In the distance, the hum of a plow rumbled through the streets. Tucking the box of letters under his arm, he braced himself for what revelations his mother might share, and wondered if he was truly ready to confront the reality of how far Teresa had gone for him. Driving across town, Eli arrived at a modest suburban home, his mother's place. A small front yard, neatly shoveled, welcomed him. She opened the door before he rang the bell, ushering him in with a constrained warmth. They settled in a living room decorated with pastel curtains and family portraits from years ago. She sat on the couch, gesturing for him to take the armchair. "You look tired." "I am," he admitted. "I've been discovering things about Grandma I never knew. I read her notes." His mother's lips pressed into a thin line. "I figured she might have written something." Her gaze flickered to the box in his hands. "What do you want to know?" He set the box on the coffee table, selecting the letter from 2016. She wrote about needing dialysis. "I found records that she cancelled treatment. Why didn't you stop her?" She sighed deeply. "I tried, Eli, but you know how stubborn she was." She said, "I'm old. I'd rather see my money go to better use than waste it on a body that's already half worn out." It pained me to watch her push away help, but she had this unyielding resolve. Anger mingled with sorrow in his throat. Better use? She was donating to charity, paying grocery tabs, all in my name, and she told everyone I was funding it. Leaning forward, his mother fiddled with a wedding ring she no longer wore. "She believed in you so fiercely. She wanted to make you an example of goodness, maybe even to encourage you to become that person. She said you were her biggest hope." Her voice wavered. "Eli, I know you loved her, but you left, and she felt you'd never come back if you thought she needed you. She wanted you free to chase your dreams." He gripped the edge of his chair, feeling tears threaten. "It's so twisted. She was proud of me, but everything I have I owe to her sacrifice, and I never realized it." A soft exhale left his mother's lips. "Maybe you needed to find your path on your own. She never wanted you to feel trapped by her health or finances." He retrieved the 2017 note. "She says, if I pay for the groceries in your name, maybe it'll feel like you're here." "She was so lonely, Mom. She wanted to feel I was close." He swallowed. "Yet I was miles away, ignorant." His mother stood and walked to a window, gazing out at the falling snow. "She'd call me sometimes too, ask if I'd heard from you. I had no updates because you didn't call me much either." She turned around. We both let her slip away. Our silence loomed until Eli asked softly, "What else did she hide? I keep feeling there's more." She pressed her lips together, then crossed to a small desk. Pulling open a drawer, she retrieved a sealed envelope with his name. "She left this with me last year, said, if one day Eli comes looking for answers, give him this." Handing it over, she offered a quiet apology. Inside the envelope was a short letter in Teresa's delicate handwriting. "Dear Eli, if you've found this, you must have read the notes. I've always believed in who you could be. Forgive me if I seem to take your place in giving. It was the only way I knew to keep you alive in my heart when you were gone. No matter what happens, remember, love does not measure cost, only intention. Yours with hope, Grandma T." He closed his eyes, tears slipping down his cheeks. He realized, with painful clarity, that her unconditional love was never about how often he visited or how many calls he made. She had simply loved him enough to let him go, even as it drained her life away. Setting the letter aside, he inhaled a trembling breath. His mother carefully sat beside him. "So, what are you going to do with the house? With her memory?" He recalled the letters, the mention of grocery tabs, the father at the church. "I don't know yet," he answered honestly. "But something in me needs to do more than just keep her memory alive. She made me look like a saint to all these neighbors. Maybe I can honor that somehow." Outside, the light continued to fade, a deeper hush settling over the neighborhood. He noticed a photograph on a nearby shelf, his grandmother, younger, holding baby Eli. She looked radiant, as though the infant in her arms was the entire world. He rose from the couch, tucking the newly received letter into the box with the rest. "I'll figure it out, Mom. Thanks for telling me everything." Before he left, she touched his shoulder gently. "Don't punish yourself too much. She wouldn't want that." With a nod, he stepped onto the porch. Snow fell in thick clusters now, blanketing the street in white. The conversation with his mother had answered some questions, but others festered, especially about the final year of Teresa's life. Her dialysis, or lack thereof, still felt like an incomplete puzzle. He also wondered about the rumors of her paying medical bills for others. Was that in the casket of secrets too? Climbing into his car, he glanced at the envelope resting on the passenger seat. He knew one thing. He couldn't just leave her house sitting there like a relic. She'd built an entire community image of him as a giver. Perhaps he owed it to her memory and to himself to become that person for real. He started the car, wipers clearing the snowy windshield, and whispered, "I promise, Grandma, I'll do better." Returning to Grandma Teresa's house felt different now. The place no longer felt merely eerie. It was heartbreakingly familiar. After parking, he noticed the porch light had been left on. He hadn't remembered switching it off earlier. Perhaps some old electrical quirk. Shouldering the door open, he kicked snow from his boots and stepped inside. He placed the letters and envelope on the dining table. An itch of curiosity led him to rummage once again through the living room, checking behind picture frames. He found only dust and a couple of yellowing receipts for groceries. Then he ventured into the bedroom. The bed was neatly made, a floral comforter folded back at the corners. A nightstand held a lamp, a clock, and a framed photo of him at high school graduation. The quiet, unwavering pride in those old eyes stabbed him with regret. By the closet, he discovered a stack of crocheted blankets. Underneath them lay a small wooden box. Inside, he found a tarnished silver pendant shaped like a heart with initials TR. He guessed it was her late husband's last gift. As he fingered the delicate chain, he recalled that she'd rarely spoken of his grandfather, who had passed away before Eli was born. Another piece of her life he never knew. Later, as the winter night deepened, he made a light supper in the kitchen. Memories drifted in, the taste of homemade soup from her stove, the smell of fresh bread. He realized how her presence saturated each wall, each dish. Searching for normalcy, he turned on the small TV in the living room. Local news flickered across the screen. Nothing interesting. Then he remembered Father Jonas had given him those hospital documents. She had cancelled dialysis, but there were partial payments made. For whose treatments? Flipping through the pages once more, he recognized different patient names. Realization dawned. She had been helping others pay for dialysis too, not just ignoring her own. She'd used her scarce funds to buy them more time, as though her own life was secondary. His chest tightened. She'd always said she already had everything she needed. He saw now that she wanted others to have what she believed she no longer deserved for herself. The scale of her selflessness was staggering. Unable to sleep, he pulled on a coat and grabbed a flashlight. In the backyard stood a small shed. Snow crunched underfoot as he trudged through the darkness. If there were more hidden items, maybe they'd be there. Inside, the shed smelled musty, stacked with old garden tools and cracked flower pots. Against one wall, he spotted battered cardboard boxes labeled donations. Peering inside, he found crocheted hats, scarves, baby blankets. Possibly, she'd been preparing them for the local hospital or homeless shelter right up until the end. "Grandma," he muttered, feeling a lump in his throat. "Why did you do so much alone?" The flashlight beam danced across a dusty corner. He spotted a rusted metal trunk. Prying it open, he discovered more crocheted pieces, along with envelopes addressed to Children's Ward. She must have been planning an entire distribution. The trunk also contained a ledger. Inside it were columns of figures, each entry next to a name. Some were tiny amounts, others slightly larger. Among them, certain lines were highlighted with a note, "Paid by E." Was that supposed to stand for Eli? She'd been attributing every last dollar of these charitable works to him, even as she quietly let her own health deteriorate. He pressed his palms against his eyelids. The weight of her love was almost unbearable. The reflection of the flashlight on the trunk's metal surface reminded him of a mirror, and he half expected to see her standing behind him, smiling kindly. Instead, he only felt her absence. Back inside the house, he set the ledger on the kitchen counter. He would have to figure out how to handle these debts or obligations she'd created under his name. Maybe he could continue them, or at least finalize any outstanding promises. He wasn't sure yet how, but a determination smoldered in him. He would not let her memory fade into a silent sacrifice. At midnight, he slid into bed, the crocheted blanket pulled to his chin. He stared at the dark ceiling, forcing away images of her writing those letters year after year. He drifted into a restless sleep, haunted by the magnitude of her quiet devotion. He woke before dawn, unsettled, as if he'd heard a noise. But the house was silent. After a moment of lying there, heart-pounding, he realized the dream he'd been having. Grandma Teresa, standing in a bright hospital corridor, telling him, "Let them live, Eli," before dissolving into light. He sat up, breathing hard. The winter wind rattled the windows. Perhaps it was time to think bigger. She hadn't just wanted him to succeed. She'd believed in a version of him that helped others. Could he become that man? Did he dare try? Rising from the bed, he murmured, "I will." Whether that meant staying in this town or something else, he couldn't say. But he knew he had to do more than mourn. He had to act, because every time he thought of her refusing dialysis, he remembered she was literally trading her years for the sake of others. Over breakfast, stale cereal and watery coffee, Eli contemplated the stack of letters again. He'd read each one, but maybe he had missed something. Setting the bowl aside, he methodically unfolded them in chronological order. As he finished rereading the 10th note, the phone in his pocket buzzed, a text from a number he didn't recognize. "Heard you're back in town. This is Sandra from the Neighborhood Watch. Could we meet?" He recalled that Sandra had recognized him outside the grocery store. Perhaps she knew more about Teresa's last weeks. He agreed, and they arranged to meet at a small cafe near the local library. Huddled in a booth, Sandra explained that Grandma Teresa had volunteered at the library, reading stories to children well into her final months. We tried to make her rest, but she always said, "No time to rest. There's a boy in Boston who needs me strong." I guess she meant you. Eli felt a pang in his chest. She never told me about that. Sandra nodded sympathetically. She told the kids you were paying for new books. She even wrote your name in the inside covers. Donated by Eli. And the strangest part, she refused recognition for herself. Her expression grew somber. I realize now that maybe she was living vicariously through that image of you, the big-hearted donor. His coffee grew cold as they talked. He left with more admiration and heartbreak for his grandmother. Stepping outside, he decided to go to the library. A short walk later, he arrived at a modest brick building. Inside, the children's section featured bright murals and low shelves, filled with colorful books. Sure enough, he found multiple volumes inscribed with "Donated by Eli." In each, a neat note, "From the best grandmother's best boy." He closed the book, tears stinging. Her unwavering faith in him almost felt like a responsibility she'd handed down. Perhaps she had thought her illusions would become reality someday. Returning to the house, he splayed the letters across the dining table again. He wanted to see if any mention had been made about specific people she helped. The 12th letter mentioned a neighbor's child who needed a surgery. She said she donated a small sum. The next line read, "I'm sorry, but I'll have to miss my own appointment next week." That's all right. Eli would do the same if he were here. He closed his eyes. She genuinely believed he would have done the same. Maybe he would have if only he'd known. He murmured to the empty room, "Why didn't you tell me? Why hide it all?" Then he remembered she had told him. Through these letters, through her daily phone calls, he never returned. Maybe she'd known he wasn't yet ready to confront her sacrifices. Afternoon sunlight slanted through the window. He sorted the last few letters. One of them simply said, "Sometimes when I write to you, it feels like you're listening. Thank you for that." His chest felt heavy. She had found comfort even in imaginary conversations. Checking the final letter, dated December 25th, 2019, he read it once more. "If you're reading this, it means you finally came. You never owed me anything, Eli. Please forgive my little lies. I wanted everyone to see you the way I do, full of kindness and promise." He pressed the paper to his chest. "I don't deserve it," he whispered. Then something in the text caught his attention. She wrote, "Please, do one more favor for me. Look behind the old coffee can in the pantry. There's something important." Heart pounding, he set the letter down and went into the kitchen. In the pantry, behind a half-empty coffee can, he discovered a crumpled envelope taped to the wall. Carefully peeling it off, he opened it. Inside was a single line. "Meet Father Jonas at St. Jude's Hospital, 4th floor." St. Jude's was half an hour away, a larger regional hospital. Another clue she had left. Why was that location important? Father Jonas was from St. Lucy's Church, but apparently he had business at the hospital. Checking the clock, Eli realized it was late afternoon already. If he hurried, perhaps he could catch the priest before day's end. Slipping the envelope into the box with her letters, he grabbed his keys and coat. The wind outside had picked up, swirling flakes in the driveway. Part of him hesitated. What more secrets could she have possibly left? Each new discovery further twisted his guilt, yet it also fueled a desire to learn the full story. Maybe this final puzzle piece would help him find closure or a way to carry out her legacy in a meaningful way. As he started the car, an image of Grandma Teresa's gentle smile filled his mind, as though encouraging him to keep going, keep uncovering what she left behind. He nodded at the memory. "Okay, Grandma, I'll do it." Eli's drive to St. Jude's Hospital was slow and tense, the roads slippery from fresh snow. Street lamps flickered on as dusk descended, painting the world in bluish shadows. When he arrived at the hospital's tall grey facade, it loomed against the evening sky. Inside, the atmosphere was a mix of sterile hallways and the murmur of patients. He asked a receptionist if Father Jonas was there. She made a quick call, then pointed him to the 4th floor. Wandering past wards of beeping monitors and antiseptic smells, he found the priest near a waiting area. Father Jonas looked surprised. "Eli, what brings you here?" he said, smoothing his clerical collar. Eli produced the envelope from his grandmother. "She left a note saying I should come to the 4th floor and find you." Father Jonas exhaled, guiding him down the hallway. Yes, this place held a special significance for Teresa. She used to visit patients who couldn't afford certain treatments, delivering hand-sewn blankets. As they walked, they passed a few rooms with partially open doors, each revealing glimpses of weary patients and anxious families. Eventually, they stopped outside a small supply closet. Father Jonas unlocked it, gesturing for Eli to follow. Inside, among shelves of medical supplies, was a cardboard box labeled Holiday Donations. Inside the box lay crocheted blankets and scarves, much like the ones in Teresa's shed, and also an envelope marked for the dialysis fund. "She wanted you to see this," Father Jonas said quietly, "because it's where part of her money went. Money she could have used for her own treatment, but instead she insisted on helping others pay for theirs." Eli's chest constricted. "So she was coming here regularly, donating supplies and money to help people with the same issue she had, but refused to treat." A soft nod. "She believed her time had come, but that others deserved more time. She once said, 'My life has been long enough, but some of these folks are barely getting started.'" Overwhelmed, Eli sank against the shelf. "I don't know how to process all this. She was saintly in ways I never appreciated." Father Jonas gave him a moment, then continued, "She also wanted you to consider something." He handed over a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "She wrote it for you in case you reached this point of discovery." Unfolding it, Eli read, "Eli, if you're standing in this very closet, it means you've learned about my final wish. I never intended to guilt you, only to inspire you. If you can, please continue giving blankets or donations in the name you choose, because these people need hope. But remember, your life is precious too. Don't sacrifice it the way I did. Live fully, my boy." Warm tears slid down his cheeks. "Grandma," he whispered, "why did you never tell me directly?" Father Jonas set a gentle hand on his arm. "She felt that if you knew, you'd drop everything to help her, and she thought you deserved to chase your dreams." Eli closed his eyes, an ache in his chest. In that moment, he remembered the box of crocheted donations in her shed, the ledger of payments in his name. She had shaped an entire persona around him, a kind, benevolent figure, hoping he would become it one day. Maybe he could. A nurse poked her head in. "Father Jonas, they're calling for you on the 1st floor." "I'll be right there," he replied, stepping out. Before leaving, he turned to Eli. "Whatever you decide, do it for the right reasons. Your grandmother believed in you more than anyone." Alone, Eli knelt by the donations box, running his fingers over the soft yarn. He pictured Grandma Teresa crocheting these blankets by lamplight, ignoring her own pain. It dawned on him that she must have known exactly what she was doing, forging a legacy for him to continue. He carried that thought with him as he left the hospital. Darkness had fully fallen, and the parking lot glowed under tall fluorescent lights. Christmas was only a few days away. He wondered if he should host something at her house, a meal or gathering for everyone she'd helped. But would they even come? Back at the house, he realized how quiet it was. Tomorrow, he would attempt to reach out to neighbors, invite them for a Christmas Eve dinner in her memory. She had always hoped he would stand in her place, bridging the distance between him and the community she cherished. In the living room, he moved the old dining table closer to the fireplace, dusting off chairs. He scribbled a list of the people he'd heard about, the families she paid groceries for, the children at the library, the patients who'd received dialysis help. A pang of uncertainty pricked him. Would they accept an invitation from the grandson who had seemingly done all these things from afar? By midnight, he stood in the near-empty dining room, hands on his hips, staring at the mismatched chairs and an outdated chandelier overhead. In his memory, he saw Teresa beaming at him, her eyes full of quiet affection. Slowly, he nodded to the ghost of her presence. Yes, he would invite them all. Maybe no one would come, but he had to try. Because if she'd taught him anything, it was that love reaches out, even when unreciprocated. Strangely, he felt more at peace than he had in days. The decision was made. Tomorrow, he would begin the calls and visits, determined to bring life back into these old walls the way she would have wanted. The next day, Eli woke early and busied himself in the kitchen. After rummaging through cupboards, he found Teresa's battered recipe box. Inside were instructions for pies, casseroles, stews, handwritten in neat cursive. He decided on a simple stew for Christmas Eve dinner, along with a couple of pies if he could manage. He wasn't an experienced cook, but he felt guided by her presence in every note. By mid-morning, he started making phone calls. Some numbers were outdated, but he reached a few neighbors. An elderly man named Henry, a single mother named Carmen, and even the costurera who once helped Teresa. Most responded with surprise or hesitation, but he invited them anyway, explaining he wanted to honor Grandma Teresa's memory. He also visited the library, leaving handwritten invitations near the children's reading area. Though it felt strange to scribble personal requests on bright, sticky notes, the librarian recognized him from the day before, giving him an encouraging nod. "She meant a lot to us," she said softly, adding that she'd pass along the message to any families she knew were impacted by Teresa's generosity. That evening, he arrived back at the house with bags of groceries. He'd decided to try baking an apple pie from Teresa's recipe. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and fresh apples, reminding him of old holiday seasons. He whispered a thank you to his grandmother for leaving behind instructions that made him feel connected, as if she were guiding his hands. Late that night, he set the table with mismatched plates, lining up chairs around it. The worn tablecloth had crocheted trim that she must have stitched herself. He sighed, noticing one extra chair in the corner. Perhaps no one would show up anyway. But the next morning came with cautious hope. On Christmas Eve, around noon, the doorbell rang. Opening it, he found Carmen, the single mother, with her 7-year-old daughter clinging to her coat. Carmen held a small batch of cookies. "We wanted to help," she murmured. "Teresa used to bring us groceries when I couldn't afford them." Eli's chest filled with gratitude. "Thank you for coming. Please come in." He led them to the living room where a low fire crackled. The little girl gazed around shyly. Over the next hour, a slow trickle of people arrived. Henry with a walking cane, carrying fresh bread from the bakery. A retired nurse who recalled Teresa's crocheted blankets for hospital patients. Even a teenager on a bike who said she once paid for his books at school. The house, which had been so quiet, now buzzed with soft chatter. Eli watched from the kitchen as they introduced themselves to each other. They reminisced about Teresa's small acts of kindness, exchanging stories he'd never heard. With cautious excitement, he invited them to stay for dinner. Most nodded enthusiastically. As dusk neared, the stew simmered on the stove, and the apple pie cooled on the counter. People gathered in the living room, some flipping through old photo albums. An older woman recognized herself in a snapshot. "She took this picture at my grandson's birthday. I didn't even know it existed. Yet for all the warmth, Eli noticed an empty seat near the table's head, Teresa's seat presumably. He swallowed hard, remembering how she once sat quietly at the corner, believing she didn't need a gift. This time, he'd left a small crocheted doily over that chair, symbolizing her presence. Suddenly the doorbell chimed again. He opened it to find a little girl alone on the porch, bundled in a worn coat. She held a short note in her gloved hand. Brown curls framed her curious eyes. "Are you Mr. Eli?" she asked softly. "Yes, I am. Who are you?" he asked, scanning the street behind her. No adult in sight. She handed him the note with trembling fingers. "My grandma used to know yours. She told me that if I ever felt lonely on Christmas, I could come here." Tears shone in her eyes. "She died last month. I don't have anywhere else to go." Eli crouched, heart pounding with empathy. "You're welcome here," he said, voice catching. "Come in." The child walked inside, marveling at the cluster of guests. In her note, scribbled in shaky handwriting, he read, "My name is Lily. I'm sorry to bother you, but I remembered the stories about your grandmother's kindness. Could you let me stay a while?" He guided Lily to the table, offering her a seat. Carmen's daughter joined her, sharing cookies. The scene struck him, two kids brought together by an echo of Teresa's compassion. He pulled out a chair, placing the new arrival near the warm fireplace. The entire gathering felt surreal. These were strangers bound by one woman's quiet love. Moments later, everyone settled at the table. Eli asked them to hold hands. The stew's aroma filled the air, and the apple pie rested temptingly at the center. Eyes fell on him. Clearing his throat, he spoke. "Thank you all for coming. My grandma would be overwhelmed to see this. She spent years thinking she had nothing else to give but her heart, and you all prove that her heart was enough. I'm learning how big it truly was." A gentle hush draped over them. Some wiped their eyes. Then, as if on cue, they began to eat and talk, forging an impromptu family around the table Teresa had once set in silence. Christmas Day dawned bright and cold. The house had never felt so alive. Most guests had left the previous night with grateful smiles, promising to keep in touch. A few, including Carmen and Lily, asked if they could drop by again later. Eli found himself nodding, sensing that these connections weren't meant to be fleeting. After tidying up, he walked into the living room. The fire had burned out, leaving a comforting warmth in the hearth. On the table sat a piece of paper, neatly folded. He opened it, reading a note in a childlike scrawl. "Thank you for letting me be here. My grandma told me your grandma was the kindest person in town. I think you are too." He felt tears prick. Even though he knew the kindness these people praised originally came from Teresa, the fact that he was now carrying it forward mattered. A new sense of purpose kindled inside him. Stepping outside to breathe in the morning air, he found a coat pocket containing one of his grandmother's final letters, the one that said, "You never owed me anything, Eli." He reread it thoughtfully. She had left him a blueprint of compassion, a legacy he couldn't ignore. Later that afternoon, he rummaged in the living room closet and pulled out the crocheted blankets he had discovered in the shed. One by one, he stacked them near the fireplace. Perhaps the people from last night, or others in need, could take them. He also remembered the ledger listing partial payments for hospital bills and groceries. Could he continue paying them in her name, or perhaps in his own name, finally owning up to the generosity she credited him for? Taking a seat at the old writing desk, he opened the ledger. Each line corresponded to a donation she'd made, with a note about who it was for. So many names. Some might have already completed their treatments or moved away. Others might still be struggling. A wave of determination hit him. He would contact them, see if help was still needed, and do what he could. He was far from wealthy, But maybe he could rally the community or set up small funds. In the following weeks, he started making calls. The library, the local grocery store, the hospital staff, each offered bits of information that helped him track people down. Many were surprised to learn that Teresa had been paying in Eli's name. Some had heartfelt words to share about how it gave them hope. The house, once quiet, began to fill with visitors bringing homemade cookies or offers to repair the roof. In return, Eli found ways to supply them with crocheted items and partial financial support where possible. He was forging a link between the fantasy of generous Eli that Teresa had invented and the reality that he was now ready to uphold. Months passed, and by the time spring approached, the battered old place had become a kind of informal gathering spot. On weekends, people would drop by for coffee and conversation. A traveling nurse who once received a crocheted blanket arrived with fresh linens for the furniture. A local teacher brought her students to interview Eli about the concept of community service. Word spread that this was Teresa's grandson's place. One evening, while going through more items in the attic, he found a worn notebook with the words, "For Eli," on the cover. Inside, short lines in her handwriting read like reminders. Teach them hope, give them the seeds, believe in them even when they can't believe in themselves. It was almost as if she had left instructions, not just for him, but for anyone who stepped into this world of quiet philanthropy. He closed the notebook, hugging it close. "I will, Grandma," he whispered. By the end of that year, the house had become a living testament to her spirit. Children visited after school to read library books Teresa had donated. Local groups used the living room for small gatherings. Eli found himself busy coordinating volunteer efforts, things he'd never imagined doing back in Boston. On a chilly afternoon, about 15 months after his grandmother's passing, he received a letter addressed simply to Eli, the grandson. Opening it, he discovered it was from Lily, the girl who came on Christmas Eve. She wrote that she was doing better, living with an aunt, and had never forgotten his kindness. A Polaroid photo of her with a new friend was tucked inside. On the back, she'd written, "You gave me hope." As he placed the letter on the mantel, next to a framed photo of Teresa, he felt a gentle wave of closure. Teresa's intangible gift, her unwavering belief in love, generosity, and the power of a single compassionate act, was invisible but enduring. He could practically hear her voice telling him that she needed no gift, only the sight of people happy. In a final gesture of gratitude, he stepped to the old oven, where he once found the hidden letters. He slipped a small note inside, scrawling, "Thank you for everything. I hope I'm making you proud." Then he closed the door, as though sealing their pact. Standing there in the stillness, he pictured her smile. And for the first time since her death, he truly felt at peace. Because even though she was gone, her love remained, woven through every thread of this old house, and every life she touched, now carried forward by him, the man she always believed he could become. Sometimes, the most powerful gifts are the ones we never see. The silent sacrifices, the unspoken love, the invisible threads that hold families together. Grandma Teresa didn't need recognition or grand gestures. She gave her life for love, quietly, selflessly, and unconditionally. Eli's story reminds us that it's never too late to become the person someone believed we could be. In a world so focused on what we have, this story shows the true value of who we are and what we give from the heart. What about you? Have you ever realized someone was silently sacrificing for you? And what did you think of this story? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell so you don't miss the next unforgettable story. Hit the like button to support our work and leave a comment telling us which country or city you're watching from. We love hearing from you, and don't forget to click on the video showing on the screen right now to watch the next recommended story. It's just as emotional and powerful. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.